The rain had started just after 10, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the old roof like a restless heartbeat. Margaret sat alone in her small living room, a blanket across her knees and a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the side table. At 68, she had grown used to the quiet, too used to it, perhaps. The television played faintly in the background. But her thoughts drifted elsewhere to the days when her house was full of laughter. The smell of coffee and the sound of her daughter's voice. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. She was about to turn off the lights when she heard a firm knock at the door. Once, then again, the sound cut through the rain like a whisper she couldn't ignore. She froze. No one visited her this late, not in years. For a moment, she thought she might be imagining it. But then came another knock, softer this time, followed by a shaky voice. "Grandma, it's me." Margaret's heart jumped. She knew that voice, Ethan's, her only grandson. She hadn't seen him in months, not since the family argument that tore them all apart. She hurried to the door, her heart racing with both worry and surprise. When she opened it, there he was, standing in the porch light, drenched from head to toe. His hair was plastered against his forehead, his clothes darkened by rain. But it was his eyes that caught her, the sadness in them. The kind that didn't come from a bad day, but from something deeper. "Ethan," she breathed, stepping aside. "You'll catch your death out there. Come in." He hesitated for a second before stepping inside. His sneakers squished against the wooden floor, leaving small puddles behind. Margaret rushed to grab a towel and pressed it into his hands. "Here, dry yourself." "What are you doing here at this hour? Did something happen?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at the floor. He looked older, somehow tired, worn down. Finally, he said quietly, "I didn't know where else to go." Those words hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't the kind of boy to show weakness. She remembered him as a smiling child with scraped knees and endless questions. But the young man standing before her looked lost. "Sit down, dear," she said softly. She led him to the kitchen where the warm glow of the old lamp softened the shadows. She poured him tea and slid the cup toward him. He wrapped his hands around it but didn't drink. They sat in silence for a while. The ticking of the clock filled the space between them. Margaret studied him quietly. His eyes were red, his expression unreadable. Something heavy weighed on him, something he wasn't sure how to say. "Talk to me, Ethan," she finally said. "Please." He took a shaky breath. "I saw Mom today." The words made her chest tighten. It had been years since Laura's name had been spoken in this house. The memories came flooding back, the argument that drove them apart, the harsh words no one could take back. Margaret had always hoped her daughter and grandson would stay close. But life had taken its own path. "She called me," Ethan continued, his voice low. "Said she wanted to see me. So, I went." Margaret waited. Her hands curled around her own cup, now cold. "She told me she's sorry," Ethan said, staring into his tea. "For everything. For leaving. For not being there. She said she just wants a chance to fix things." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "But I couldn't forgive her. Not after everything she put me through." Margaret's heart ached. She remembered the pain Laura had caused when she'd walked away years ago, shutting everyone out, including her own son. But looking at Ethan now, she saw a reflection of that same hurt, passed down like a wound that never healed. "She asked me to forgive her," he said again, his tone filled with guilt. "And I just walked away." Margaret reached across the table, laying a gentle hand over his. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "you must be hurting." He didn't look up, just nodded. "I thought I'd feel better standing up for myself. But now I just feel empty. I don't even know why I came here. I just needed someone who wouldn't judge me." Tears stung her eyes. "You did the right thing coming here. You're never alone. Not while I'm here." He finally met her gaze, and for a moment, the years between them disappeared. He wasn't a grown man anymore. He was the same little boy she used to tuck into bed, scared after a thunderstorm. Outside, the rain softened, turning into a gentle drizzle. Inside, the silence grew heavier, as if the house itself was listening. Ethan shifted in his chair. "Grandma," he said quietly, "there's something else I didn't tell you." Margaret felt her stomach twist. "What is it?" He hesitated. His lips parted, but no words came out at first. He looked as though he was wrestling with something inside. Something painful. Finally, he spoke. "Mom's sick." The words hung in the air, small but sharp. Margaret blinked, not sure she'd heard right. "Sick? What do you mean?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She didn't want to tell me at first, but she's been going through treatments. It's serious." Margaret's throat went dry. "Oh, Lord." She sat back, stunned. The room seemed to spin for a moment. "Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she tell anyone?" "She said she didn't want pity," Ethan whispered. "She just wanted to make things right." He rubbed his face, frustration and sadness mixing in his eyes. "I should have stayed, Grandma. I should have listened." Margaret reached out again, her voice trembling but warm. "You did what you could, Ethan. Sometimes people hide their pain because they're afraid of being seen as weak. But it doesn't mean they stopped loving us." He nodded, silent tears glistening on his lashes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint patter of rain against the window and the hum of the old refrigerator. Finally, Margaret stood and walked to the window. The street outside glowed faintly under the streetlights, the puddles shimmering like silver. She thought of her daughter, her laughter, her stubbornness, her distance, and felt the years of silence press down on her heart. Behind her, Ethan whispered, "I don't know what to do." Margaret turned, her face lined with both sadness and strength. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said. "You're not facing this alone." Ethan looked up at her, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in his tired eyes. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew this night had changed something. It had cracked open the past they'd both been avoiding. And through that small crack, a bit of light was finally finding its way in. The clock struck midnight. Margaret placed a gentle hand on her grandson's shoulder. "You should rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow we'll talk more." Ethan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks, Grandma, for everything." As he went to the guest room, Margaret stood alone for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. She felt a strange mix of fear and hope, fear of what lay ahead, but hope that maybe, just maybe, forgiveness wasn't too far away, and though she couldn't see it yet. That night, the knock at her door was the beginning of everything changing. Morning came slowly, with soft sunlight spilling through the curtains and the faint smell of coffee filling the air. Margaret stood by the kitchen counter, stirring two cups, one for herself, one for Ethan. The house felt different now, heavier but alive, as if the storm from the night before had awakened something inside its old walls. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept replaying Ethan's words, "Mom's sick." Those words had planted a deep ache in her chest that no amount of rest could calm. Ethan appeared in the doorway, hair messy, eyes still tired. He gave her a faint smile. "Morning, Grandma." "Morning, dear," she said gently, sliding a cup toward him. "How did you sleep?" He shrugged. "Didn't really. Too much on my mind." She nodded. "I understand. I didn't sleep much either." They sat across from each other in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. The air between them felt fragile, filled with unspoken questions, old memories, and the weight of what they now knew. Margaret wanted to ask 100 things at once: how long Laura had been sick, what the doctor said, if there was any hope, but she didn't want to push him. Instead, she waited for him to speak first. Ethan's fingers traced the edge of his mug. "Grandma," he began quietly, "do you ever think about what happened between you and Mom?" Margaret froze for a second. "Every day," she admitted. "There isn't a morning I don't think about the last words we said to each other." He looked at her carefully. "Why did it get so bad?" She sighed, staring at the steam rising from her cup. "Because we were both too proud. I wanted her to live the way I thought was best. She wanted to make her own choices. Neither of us could bend." Ethan nodded slowly. She told me about some of it. Said she felt like she disappointed you. Margaret's voice softened. She didn't disappoint me, Ethan. I just didn't know how to let go. When your mother left, I thought she was throwing everything away. I thought I had to be strong, but I only made things worse. Ethan listened quietly, eyes heavy with emotion. She said she never stopped loving you, even when she stayed away. That simple sentence pierced her heart. For years, she had convinced herself that Laura wanted nothing to do with her, that the silence was a choice, not a wound. Hearing otherwise shook her. Margaret took a deep breath. You know, when she was little, she used to draw pictures for me and leave them on my pillow every night. She always wanted to make me smile. Somewhere along the way, we forgot how to do that for each other. Ethan stared at the table, his voice barely above a whisper. I think that's what scared me yesterday. When she told me she was sick, I saw the same look in her eyes you have right now. The look of someone who wishes they could go back. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but Ethan noticed. He reached across the table and touched her hand gently. She wants to come home, Grandma, he said softly. She didn't say it directly, but I could tell. She just didn't know if you'd want her back. Margaret's breath caught. Of course I want her back, she said. She's my daughter. Then quieter, but after all these years, what would I even say to her? Start with hello, Ethan said, his voice steady. That's all she needs. The simplicity of his words broke something inside her. For so long she had imagined their reunion as impossible, a moment too painful, too full of regret. But now, with Ethan sitting across from her, it didn't seem so far out of reach. He went on, his tone trembling slightly. When I saw her yesterday, I thought she looked tired but strong. She's trying to stay positive. But I think what she really wants isn't medicine or treatment. She wants peace. She wants her family. Margaret swallowed hard, her throat tight. I can't believe she didn't call me sooner. She said she was afraid you'd still be angry, Ethan said. She didn't want to make things worse. Margaret stared into the distance, her thoughts spinning. How many years had they both wasted being stubborn? How many birthdays and holidays had passed with empty chairs and unanswered calls? The weight of it pressed down on her chest. I was angry for a long time, she admitted softly. But now, I just wish I could hold her again. Ethan gave her a sad smile. Then do it. Don't wait until it's too late. Margaret looked at him, seeing not the boy she used to babysit, but a man carrying wisdom beyond his years. His pain had made him stronger, and she was grateful he had come to her not just for comfort, but for guidance she hadn't realized she needed to. I think she'll listen if you call, Ethan said. She's been checking her phone all day, hoping you would. Margaret nodded slowly, though fear tugged at her heart. What if she doesn't pick up? Ethan smiled faintly. Then call again tomorrow. Don't stop trying. Silence filled the kitchen again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was the quiet of two people beginning to heal. Margaret reached for the phone on the counter, but paused. Not yet, she whispered. I need to find the right words first. Ethan understood. He stood and moved to the window, watching the sunlight glint off the wet grass outside. It's strange, he said softly. I came here last night thinking I'd lost everything. But now it feels like we might get a second chance. Margaret smiled through her tears. Sometimes losing your way is how you find what really matters. They spent the rest of the morning talking about the past, about Laura's childhood, about the good days that time had buried under pride. Margaret shared stories Ethan had never heard before. How? Laura had stayed up late as a girl to bake cookies for her father's birthday. How she used to sing in the car during long drives. Ethan laughed softly at those memories. She never told me that, he said. She probably didn't think I remembered. Margaret replied, but I do. Every small thing. As they talked, the tension in the room began to lift. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt unbearable. It felt like something they could face together by noon. The sun had broken fully through the clouds, and the house was filled with warm light. Margaret stood, walked to the phone, and stared at it for a moment. Her hand trembled, but this time she didn't hesitate. She dialed a familiar number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Hello? Margaret's eyes filled with tears at the sound of her daughter's voice. Softer now, older but still her Laura. For a moment neither spoke. The silence carried all the years they had lost. Then, with a shaky breath, Margaret whispered, Laura, it's Mom. On the other end, there was a pause, then a quiet sob. Mom, I've missed you. Margaret's voice broke. I've missed you too, sweetheart. Ethan stood in the doorway listening, tears in his eyes but a small smile on his face. He knew then that last night's knock had been more than a cry for help. It had been the start of something bigger. The family that had once fallen apart was finding its way home again. And though the road ahead would not be easy, in that small kitchen filled with sunlight and forgiveness, it finally felt possible. The following day carried a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Margaret woke early, her heart still fluttering from the phone call the night before. Hearing her daughter's voice after so many years had shaken her to the core. She hadn't realized how much she had missed that sound, the way Laura's tone still held a hint of the bright, fearless girl she once was. They hadn't spoken long. Both were emotional, hesitant, unsure what to say after a decade of silence. But the most important thing had been said. I miss you. That was enough to open the door they had both kept locked for too long. Margaret sat at the kitchen table with her tea, waiting for Ethan to wake up. The morning sun spilled across the worn wooden floor, painting golden stripes across the room. Everything felt fragile, yet full of hope. Like the quiet before a new beginning. When Ethan finally came down the stairs, she saw a new calmness in him. Morning, Grandma, he said, his voice softer than usual. Morning, dear, she replied, smiling faintly. I spoke to your mother last night. He stopped mid-step. You did, she nodded. It wasn't a long call, but it was something. She sounded weak, but happy to hear my voice. Ethan sat down, his expression mixed with relief and guilt. She's been waiting for that call for years. Margaret sighed, tracing the rim of her cup. So have I. For a few moments they sat in silence, each lost in thought. Then Ethan said quietly, She told me she wants to come home. She didn't know if you'd want that. Margaret's heart squeezed. She'll always have a place here. Always. He nodded but didn't smile. His eyes darkened slightly as if holding back something more. There's something I didn't tell you, Grandma. Her chest tightened. What is it, Ethan? He looked down at his hands, his voice trembling. It's worse than I thought. Mom's cancer has spread. The doctors said it's advanced. The words struck Margaret like a blow. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she couldn't move. The cup in her hand rattled against the saucer. Oh no! Ethan swallowed hard, his face pale. She didn't want to tell you because she didn't want to make you worry. But I can't keep it from you anymore. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her chest as memories flooded in Laura as a little girl running through the yard, laughing with her pigtails flying behind her. The day she graduated, the joy in her eyes. The last argument, the slammed door. And now, the thought that her daughter might be slipping away made her heart ache in ways words couldn't describe. She's trying to stay strong, Ethan continued, his voice breaking. But I can tell she's scared. She told me she doesn't want pity, just peace. Margaret stood slowly, pacing to the window. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too harsh for what she was hearing. I should have called her sooner, she whispered. All these years. I let pride steal time from us. Ethan came to her side. You still have time, Grandma? She wants to see you. She needs you. Margaret turned toward him, her face wet with tears. What if she doesn't want to forgive me? He shook his head firmly. She already has. She told me that. She said she doesn't blame you anymore, that she blames herself for staying away so long. Margaret's knees felt weak. She sank into a chair and covered her face. I was so angry at her back then, she murmured. I thought she didn't care about anyone but herself. But now I see she was just lost, just like I was. Ethan sat across from her, his voice calm but heavy. Grandma, you can't change the past, but you can decide what you do now. She looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the man her grandson had become, steady, kind, and wise beyond his years. He had carried pain, but he hadn't let it destroy him. He was the bridge between them, the reason their family still had a chance. Do you think she'll come home? Margaret asked softly. I think she's waiting for you to say yes. Margaret's heart pounded. She stood again, straightened her shoulders, and said, Then call her. Tell her to come. Ethan's face lit up with a faint smile. You really mean it? Yes, she said firmly. If she's willing to come home, I'll be waiting. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed quickly. Margaret listened as he spoke in a low voice. Mom. Yeah, I'm with Grandma. She wants you to come home. It was a long pause. Then Ethan smiled softly. She's crying, he whispered, covering the receiver. She said she'll come tomorrow. Margaret's eyes closed in relief. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from pain, they were from gratitude. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow, my daughter's coming home. That night, Margaret could barely sleep. Every sound in the house seemed louder, every tick of the clock slower. Her thoughts kept drifting to Laura Howe. She must look now, how weak she might be, how much she had gone through alone. The idea that her daughter had faced something so terrible without her broke her heart. She wandered into the living room. The old photograph still hanging on the wall. There was one of Laura as a teenager, standing on the beach, wind in her hair, eyes full of dreams. Margaret touched the frame gently. You're coming home, she whispered. We'll make things right. The next morning, Ethan found her sitting there, the picture still in her lap. Couldn't sleep again? He asked softly. No, she said. But it's all right. Some nights are meant for remembering. He smiled sadly. She'll be here by evening. I'll pick her up from the station. Margaret nodded, her voice trembling. Thank you, Ethan, for bringing her back into my life. He shook his head. You brought her back, Grandma. I just knocked on your door. She laughed quietly, wiping her eyes. You always had your mother's heart. When Ethan left to fetch Laura, Margaret spent the day preparing the house. She changed the sheets in the guest room, polished the old silverware, and placed fresh flowers on the table. Each small task filled her with both fear and joy. She wanted everything to be perfect, not for appearances, but because this reunion meant more than anything else in her life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood on the porch, her hands twisting nervously. The sound of a car pulling up made her heart leap. She saw Ethan step out, then gently help a woman from the passenger seat. Even from a distance, Margaret recognized her older, thinner, but still her Laura. For a moment, time stopped. Mother and daughter stared at each other, a decade of silence between them. Then, slowly, Laura smiled through her tears. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. Margaret's lips quivered as she stepped forward. Welcome home, sweetheart. The moment their hands touched, the years of distance melted away. They embraced tightly, both crying softly, holding on to each other as if afraid to ever let go again. Ethan stood nearby, his eyes glistening. For the first time in a long time, he saw peace settle over them. The rain, the hurt, the years of silence, all of it had led to this moment of forgiveness. And as they walked inside together, the old house seemed to breathe again, filled with love, warmth, and the promise of healing. The air that evening carried a quiet warmth, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. Margaret stood in the doorway of her home, her heart racing as she watched her daughter and grandson step toward her. The setting sun cast soft golden light across the yard, wrapping everything in a peaceful glow. Laura moved slowly, her steps careful, her face pale but glowing with emotion. Ethan stayed close beside her, his hand gently supporting her arm. Margaret's breath caught. So many times she had imagined this moment, what it would feel like to see her daughter again after so many years. Now that it was real, she couldn't find the right words. All she could do was open her arms. Laura stopped a few feet away, tears already streaming down her face. Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling. That single word broke the years of silence between them. Margaret stepped forward and wrapped her daughter in her arms. The hug was gentle but full of everything they had both been holding inside: dread, forgiveness, love. Laura sobbed against her shoulder, her voice muffled. "I'm so sorry." Margaret held her tighter. "No, sweetheart. I'm sorry too. I should have called. I should have come for you." For a long moment, they stayed like that, mother and daughter holding on to each other as if afraid that letting go would bring back the years of distance. Ethan watched quietly from the porch, his heart heavy and full all at once. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret brushed a strand of hair from Laura's face. "You look beautiful," she said softly. Laura smiled weakly. "I don't feel beautiful anymore, Mom. I just feel tired." Margaret took her hand. "Then you'll rest here. You're home now." Ethan helped bring in Laura's small suitcase. Margaret led them into the living room where the fireplace was already crackling. The air smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. She had spent the whole day preparing the house, wanting it to feel warm and welcoming. Laura looked around slowly. "Everything looks the same," she said with a faint smile. "Even the pictures are in the same places." "I couldn't bring myself to change them," Margaret admitted. "It felt like a way to keep you close." They sat together near the fire, the silence between them no longer heavy but comforting. Margaret studied her daughter closely, the thinner frame, the faint shadows under her eyes. There was a fragility about her now, but also a quiet strength that came from fighting hard battles. After a while, Laura looked up. "I didn't know if you'd ever want to see me again," she said quietly. Margaret's voice trembled. "I never stopped wanting to see you. I just didn't know how to reach out without reopening old wounds." Laura nodded, tears glistening. "I let my pride get in the way. I thought I had more time to make things right." Ethan placed a hand on hers. "You still do, Mom." Laura smiled at him, her eyes full of love and sadness. "You've always been my anchor, Ethan, even when I was too lost to admit it." He shook his head. "You're my mom. You never stopped being that." Margaret watched them with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, her family was together under one roof. It didn't matter that their time might be short. What mattered was that they had found their way back to each other. Later that evening, they sat down for dinner. The table was simple but full of warmth: soup, bread, and the apple pie Margaret had baked earlier. Laura took a small bite, smiling faintly. "You still make the best pie in the world," she said. Margaret laughed softly. "Some things don't change." The conversation flowed gently, like a river finding its path again. They spoke about small things, the neighbors, old memories, the holidays they missed. There was laughter, tears, and moments of quiet reflection. Each word seemed to heal an old scar. Each smile rebuilt a piece of what had been broken. As the night deepened, Laura leaned back in her chair, exhausted but peaceful. "I forgot what it felt like to just sit and talk like this," she said. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're home now, and that's all that matters." Ethan looked between them, his heart swelling with relief. He had feared that bringing his mother here would reopen pain, but instead it had brought light. Watching them now, he realized that sometimes love needed time, years, even to find its way back. When it was time for bed, Margaret helped Laura to her room. The bed was made with fresh sheets and the quilt Margaret had sewn years ago. "You kept this?" Laura asked, running her fingers over the faded fabric. "Of course," Margaret said with a smile. "You made it with me when you were 16. I couldn't let it go." Laura sat on the edge of the bed, her voice soft. "You've always kept everything that mattered." Margaret brushed her hair gently, like she used to when Laura was a girl. "Because you always mattered most, even when I didn't show it right." Laura looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Thank you, Mom, for letting me come home." Margaret's own tears fell freely now. "You don't ever need permission to come home, Laura. You belong here." Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Good night, Mom. I'll be right across the hall if you need anything." Laura smiled at him, her voice weak but warm. "Good night, sweetheart. I love you." After Ethan left, Margaret sat beside her daughter until she drifted off to sleep. She listened to Laura's slow, steady breathing, feeling both sorrow and peace. The years of anger and silence were gone. What remained was love, pure, unconditional, strong enough to outlast pain. When she finally stepped out into the hallway, Ethan was waiting there. "She's sleeping," he asked quietly. Margaret nodded. "Yes, she looks peaceful." They walked to the living room where the fire had burned low. Margaret sat down on the couch, her face tired but glowing with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. "You didn't just come here that night to find comfort, you brought it with you. You brought her back." Ethan smiled faintly. "I think we all needed this, Grandma. We all needed a home to come back to." She reached for his hand. "You've grown into such a good man. Your mother would be proud." "She already told me she is," he said, his voice low. They sat there quietly, watching the fire fade into soft embers. The house, once filled with emptiness, now pulsed with life again. The sound of the rain outside had been replaced by the calm hush of the night. For the first time in many years, Margaret felt peace settle deep in her heart. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Laura's illness was still there, shadowing their joy. But this time they would face it together as a family. Before heading to bed, Margaret looked out the window. The moonlight glowed softly across the garden Laura used to play in as a child. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving me one more chance." The next morning, sunlight streamed into the house and laughter returned with it. Laura woke to the smell of breakfast, Ethan humming in the kitchen, and her mother's soft footsteps. It felt like the start of a new life, one built not on perfection, but on forgiveness. And as Margaret stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while her daughter and grandson chatted nearby, she realized something powerful. Love doesn't fade with distance or time. It waits quietly, patient, and strong, for the moment it's finally welcomed home.